Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Records with Ray. Today I am with my good friends Travis and Matthias. Did I get it right?
Right.
Yes. And Matthias is from Germany and you're from Kansas.
Kansas originally.
So we're representing all the sections of the world today. I was talking to Matthias the other day and we're talking about Front 242, who is an industrial band, a very, very big industrial band. Going from like the 80s into the 90s, like that's when their peak was, right?
Correct.
And you were saying that, you mentioned to me that like, well, after a while, Front 24 continued on to make new albums, but then everyone just still wanted to hear the old stuff.
That's right.
And you didn't like that.
Correct.
Why?
I have to say that I recently figured out the reason why they did it. But for me at this time felt like the band itself got annoyed by their fans, and because they were just consuming the early stuff, like the hits like Headhunter, Master Hit, and they tried with Evil Off, and that was the most progressive albums they brought out for me, because they start using guitars and real drum sets and stuff like that, and was basically the same music that Prodigy, for example, did 5 years later and went through the roof with it, with these combination of different electronic styles with guitars and these punky.
And you're like looking at Prodigy and it's like, why are these guys making money off doing the same type of music that Front 242 was already making?
Right. I think at one point, in first place, the world wasn't ready for it, because this whole electronic scene was so related to the electronic, everything that just had a guitar in it or a real drum set was considered old rock and roll shit, and
well, this is the topic of this episode, and the topic is old bands making new music. Right. And it isn't just Front 24, because the more we talked and the more I thought about it, there's a lot of bands where they continued on to make albums.
Right,
and I'm guilty of it too. Like for example, like I grew up on like 80s thrash metal and stuff like that. Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, or let's just say like Iron Maiden. But there's a certain point where like I was into the albums, and then they continued to make more, and I'm just sort of like, I don't care.
Yeah, and
well, I guess the question is, why do you think that happens? Why do you think why fans will be into a band for a certain amount of time and then they give up or quit?
I think it depends on the way yourself or the fans listen into it, because they get kind of hit by a track they totally like. Like the first Front 242 or whatever. Even we talked about that Rolling Stones. If people go to a Rolling Stones concert in now or next year or whenever it is possible again, they want to hear Satisfaction, Painted Black, and all the hits. Otherwise, they say, "Oh, that was not the best concert I saw."
Yeah. No. Well, what do you think about this, Travis?
So you like something.
Yep.
You're all about it. And as you grow, you're finding new things.
Yep.
And I don't know whether it's not really nostalgia at that point, because you're not looking back romantically at it yet. But you get to this point where it's just like you feel like you've experienced in your life, you've experienced everything that had to offer to you, maybe.
Yep.
And something else is coming along and, hits your pleasure centers in your brain just right, and you start gravitating towards that.
I think you nailed it on the head with the timing thing. It's a combination of timing and just people's progression of themselves.
Yeah.
Like when you were into industrial music, we're talking the 90s. But I'm guessing that you probably were into that and stayed into that genre music probably a lot longer than like other people.
The thing is that these industrial scene in Germany basically died out.
Yep.
In a commercial way. There are still small clubs with 50 people a night or so, and some bigger festivals, but that's basically it. And I think it is because bands stop quitting or stop developing their music. It's not. I think we have to exclude Front 242 because I learned that it was exactly what they wanted to do, because they set up the whole band as a brand.
Yep.
They were all not musicians, graphic designers and architects, so they had the logo and the graphics before they had the music, and they put together their music or sounds up to a point where they found, oh, that's totally what we wanted, and we just take these songs and putting them together in a different way to make them better, like Apple does it with the iMac. You know, there's an iMac and it's a good concept they developed at one point, and just improving it, and that's what they do. So, but other industrial bands like Nizza App had the same problem in the beginning of the 90s, that the fans were really upset and sometimes aggressive in Germany against the band when they didn't play the hits. And Nizza App was on a point where they want to separate their new music from their old music because they want to improve themselves, but the fans didn't accept that, so they stopped making music under the name of Nizza App, you know.
Back to a time when you actually used to go out dancing. And I remember I used to go out dancing to industrial music. And it's weird because it's like there's two ways that you could have enjoyed music. One, you can go see the band live. Or one, you'd go out dancing.
To a club. Yep.
To a club. And I just thought of this. There's everyone going out, they have their list of songs that you want them to play tonight when you are dancing, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some songs that everyone's gonna love. There's like Headhunter, like that was a hit. Like when that song was being played, everyone would go out to the dance floor. I remember Smothered Hope from Skinny Puppy. That would be a big one. That you'd start hearing that going, everyone would run. But if the DJ started playing songs that no one cared about, would just get off the dance floor. And the thing is, it's like people want to hear Headhunter, and I think a lot of people probably wouldn't care about even if they had a song that was better than that. Correct. No one cares,
right?
And sadly, to lay out new music at a dance club is kind of a hard thing to do,
right?
Yeah, and you also mentioned an interesting thing that I'd kind of forgotten in my analogy is a band creating constantly, any artist constantly trying to create new art is in danger of falling into a rut.
Right.
I mean, and some people have that rut and they do it spectacularly well. I mean, you look at the Chuck Berry catalog, he was all the time recycling, taking his riffs and changing the words to a song.
Yeah, and he actually has Johnny Be Good. And then he wrote another song called Bye Bye Johnny.
Well, no, I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about the same music line throughout the whole thing. He just changed the lyrics, and then whatever version of that got, was popular, quote unquote, that's the one they rode with. But, a lot of times you're throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks. But on the double edge of that sword is, potentially falling into a rut where all your music is beginning to sound the same, and you lose the interest of your audience.
Yep.
And
if you try to go into a different direction, you might very well lose a lot of your original fans.
Right. Exactly.
Because I have to think, like, when David Bowie stopped doing Ziggy Stardust, and then he went into the Thin White Duke era, I bet you there was a lot of people who are like, golden years? The hell's this shit?
Well,
maybe he probably acquired new fans.
Yeah,
that were into it, but he I think of him the most because he is a guy his career spanned decades, and did a lot of different genres of music.
I mean, he
is it better? Is it better for a musician to evolve and change, or is it better for the band to stay the same?
I think it's the same what the artist wants. If he wants it just for himself and developing and exploring new territories, or does he wants to make music to be successful?
I'm thinking about Elaine Jurgensen, the creator of Ministry, right? And there's Ministry, but what I found fascinating about him is that he had all these other like one-off projects that he did. It wasn't even like projects. I mean, he'd create like 2 songs and release this like a CD with like 2 songs on it. Like 1,000 Homely DJs was like a band. Palehead was one where he did that with Ian McKay, and he did all these different types of industrial music, but they all were their own band. Is it better, do you think, if you're going to change your style, to just have a different band name, or is it better to keep your band name and do the progression?
You know, we've got the artist, we've got the band trying to do their thing, whether or not they decide to stay a one-trick pony and just do the thing that got them that record to begin with, and people getting bored. There's examples of that, you know, people trying to, or the record company telling a band, okay, this was a hit, now I want a whole album of hits just like that. And so, you know, there's lots of
the band that comes to my mind when we're talking about this is AC/DC.
Oh yeah,
but they're a band that essentially have been writing the same music since the beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But I'll be the first to say though, as an AC/DC fan, I think there's a lot of people where everyone kind of will like dig anything from AC/DC up to a certain point. Mm-hmm. Like when they started putting out like stuff in the late 80s, that's when they started and I think what it is like, I think a band. Okay, here's the question: do you think bands have a shelf life where they can be viable and important to people and people like them, or not? Can a band go on and be?
I think it is that way. If you see, for example, Depeche Mode, they have a huge fan base out of the 80s, early 90s, let's say, until Songs of Fate and Devotion.
Yeah.
And that's, if I look at me, that's the point where I stop listening into the music. I still like Songs of Fate and Devotion as one of the greatest albums, together with the Violator album. But everything that came afterwards, it's... Yeah, I just talking about my opinion, it's kind of boring. It doesn't kick me like all the albums before, you know. And for me it's good that they still touring and making music, but it's also nothing I'm jumping on or even being interested in, you know. If I hear a new song of Depeche Mode, I never had it over the last 10-15 years that I thought, oh man, that's one
I think this is what it is. This is what needs to happen. Because I'm thinking about bands that are big, that have maintained a career. Mm-hmm. And I think the first thing that a band needs to be, for lack of a better word, is mainstream. You have to be a band that a lot of different types of people will like your music, and not be just tied to one genre. Like perfect example, you're talking about Front 242, industrial band, and there's a certain type of people that like that music. You talk about Depeche Mode. Well, Depeche Mode was they were huge in the 80s, and there's a lot of people that were into Depeche Mode that weren't necessarily into any genre of music, but they like Depeche Mode. Another band I think about is like U2. Mm-hmm. There's a band. There's a perfect example. There's a band where like say I like U2. and I have most of their albums.
I like you too.
Yeah, I do. No pun intended. But here's my thing. But my investment into that band is mediocre at best. It's like, yeah, I like them. I think they're great. They think they have some great songs. But that's as far as my love for that band is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But when you compare like that band to like like you're just bringing it back to like say industrial music, like something like the Revolting Cocks. Like I love that band,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not for everyone. Right. So maybe in order for you to have longevity, you have to be a band that's just that most people are going to like you anyway. Like I always think about like Nirvana. I hate that. Like I always wonder what would have happened with Nirvana if Kurt Cobain never died, and if they continued to write new music. What would that happen to their legacy? Would it have changed their legacy? Would they made them even bigger, or would it kind of killed it out?
Well, let's look at some real life examples.
Okay.
We've got a band like Pearl Jam.
Okay.
Who is still producing music.
Yes, they are.
Acclaimed music, because I think their last album or whatever that dropped, people were talking about some of the songs on it. I remember KXP down in Seattle playing it and it getting some talk, some buzz about some of their new music, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at Screaming Trees.
The Screaming Trees.
At that same point, they were coming up at the same time. Had a great I personally was a huge Screaming Trees fan, but it took them 8 years or however long to come up with a follow-up album. And like the concept of this, I heard some of it, but at the time in my life, I was like, yeah, if I see it, maybe I'll buy it. But yeah. The need to have that follow-up album at that point in my life, it just wasn't a priority.
Nope.
Or we have a band like, Soundgarden, kind of held strong for a while. Chris Cornell does some other projects, that sort of stuff, and comes back, and they were holding pretty steady on their own for a long time. So I think, I don't know, it's very possible that had he stayed with us, Chris Cornell would have done his other things, and then, there would be these Soundgarden reunion shows, even up today, where everybody, at some festival somewhere, Soundgarden reunion, people would have been flying in from all over the world to see them. But, it's like, it is possible, but, it would depend on the artists themselves. I mean, and there's got to be a certain amount of consistency. I mean, one thing, stepping back to Bowie real quick, one thing about Bowie's consistency, even though he kept changing his look, is that everybody knew that Bowie is going to keep changing his look. Mm-hmm. I mean, his core audience knows that that's, or, his whole thing. His whole audience knows that that's what to expect, because he's going to continue to reinvent himself.
And I think Front did, with their approach to music, building a brand people can stick to, is basically, you can apply that to all other bands, even though they don't take the approach by knowing that they're taking the approach. But if you have a certain fan base built up, they buy your albums either way, or going to their concerts.
Your hardcore fans, no matter what band you are going to be your hardcore fans, even if it's in 35 years
That's it. Branding. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the key.
And that's how they...
There you go. That's the solution to this whole conversation. Not that it was a problem. But it comes down to that. If you are a band that can create a brand of yourself,
right,
then you can continue to make music, and people are still going to buy that new music.
Right. And
you may have people that are still going to want to play the old stuff, but if you already have established yourself as a brand, it doesn't matter.
Look at Rammstein is a good example from Germany.
Yeah.
They started doing music just because they like to do music, and they, if you read books or interviews with the members of Rammstein, they always just wanted to be on stage to making noise, music, you know, and they don't give a shit basically, because there are songs from their second album or third album where you can hear that the guitarist or the guys whoever wrote the music was listening to Metallica shortly before they got into the studio and played the song Mutter, you know, because the riff is the same like the Metallica riff, and that was a kind of a little scandal at this point. But the fans don't care because they like the whole blow up show and the live shows, and that's how they built their brand. Because if you mention Rammstein to anybody who knows them, in Europe it's almost everybody, the first picture they have in mind, some fireworks on a pretty industrial lookalike stage, you know.
It's funny that this whole conversation is going to come down to Rammstein, because you're right. Because I think
Rammstein actually started in the industrial scene in Germany.
Because I think about
that's where they're coming
my
from.
relationship to that band, because like I do like them. I'm not saying I'm their biggest fan, but I do like their music. And if they were to come play, I definitely would go to their show.
Right.
And the thing about that band is you don't have to be a super fan to be into that band. But they're mainstream enough where like you don't have to be an industrial head to be into them.
Right.
You just have to like songs where all the lyrics are in German. If you want to be a band that's still relevant, you got to continue to make music that's relevant.
Right.
You've got to keep trying to evolve, because people are going to get to a point in their lives where
this is what it comes down to. Bands, you need to evolve because we're evolving too.
Yeah, to a certain extent, and there's going to be
That's it.